Well, now I turn to Ambassador Arun Kumar Singh, who is patiently listening to all what has been said. Field is all yours. You can comment on anybody's comments. That is the flexibility which you have. And others have not used their time, so I can be sort of relaxing some minutes for you in addition to your 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. So, coming at the end of a very, very rich and varied discussion, I thought to really understand the significance of this visit and what came out of it, it would be useful to see the context in which India-US relations have evolved of late and the global context in which this evolution is taking place. So the new relationship between India and the US really started in 1998. Many of you recall that that was the year we did our nuclear tests, and the US imposed heavy sanctions against India and mobilized the world to impose sanctions against India. After that, along with China, there was a joint statement that the US did where there was heavy focus on South Asia in a manner that we didn't like, because there was a sense that there a G2 developing related to South Asia, or is US working with China related to South Asia and India. And then there was a resolution in the UN Security Council 1172 which had provisions talking about India and South Asia in terms that we didn't like at all. So that's the phase from which the relationship starts evolving. We had the Kargil conflict in 1999, where we assessed that unlike in the past, US did not take just an obvious pro-Pakistan position, but assessed the issue in its merits and eventually took a position that was not unhelpful to us. There was also the series of Strobe-Talbot, Jaswant Singh dialogue at that time, where they had 14 meetings in 10 countries over a period of about a year and a half. No specific outcome emerged from those discussions, but they completely transformed the nature of the relationship. Because through that dialogue, in both countries, there was a far deeper understanding of what are the expectations, what are the compulsions, what is the way forward. And at the end of that, President Clinton comes to India in 2000, which has been referred to, for a very, very successful visit, starting the new trend. And again, many would recall that after visiting India, he visited Pakistan for 5 hours and spoke to the Pakistani people on television from the airport, which again reflecting the change that is coming about. Following that, there was an expectation that once the Republican administration of President Bush comes in, the relationship would consolidate even further. Now, it got a bit of a shock because when 9/11 happened, the expectation was that would US come down very heavily against Pakistan because of Pakistan's involvement with terrorism, whatever. But in reality, US sought cooperation and support from Pakistan because they felt that whatever they needed to do in Afghanistan, for logistics and other things, they would require the support from Pakistan. And it may be easier for them to deal with the challenge in Afghanistan if Pakistan supported them. And you'd have seen reports of they're threatening Pakistan, they're telling them sort of bomb them back to the Stone Ages unless they provided support. So Pakistan provided support. And again, you might recall General Musharraf, the president then, used to say that if I hadn't provided that support, US would have gone to India. So that was their move. But from our point of view, clearly this was a little bit of a challenge because once again, Pakistan, which had made itself relevant to the US in the Cold War by becoming a part of the military alliance system, then after 1979, by working with the US to build jihad against the Soviet Union, again became relevant in terms of US policy. While this was happening, the US clearly made an attempt also to improve relations with India. So we spoke about the next steps in strategic partnership. There was a framework agreement for defense cooperation. But what again transformed the relationship was the civil nuclear cooperation agreement that the US did with India, starting in 2005 but finally signed in 2008. It was significant because before that, following our nuclear test in 1974, US had led the world to create technology denial regimes essentially targeting India. Through the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, US then forced the world to make an exception just for India from the very same regimes that had been created to target India. So that was a very significant development. And the message from the US was that we now see India differently. We want to build a different relationship with India. Now, after the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, although in nuclear commerce, not much progress has happened between India and the US for various reasons, and both countries are still working on it. It enabled high technology cooperation in all other areas. So if you see the level of technology denials being done for India, that has come down significantly. And high technology cooperation in a range of areas is happening. It also enables step by step the US to reach a point where it now declares India a major defense partner. Because declaring India a major defense partner means that now, even in defense, US is prepared to work for giving higher levels of technology to India. And the recent release or authorization for supply of drones, the Guardian drones, is one indicator of that. So with the Bush administration, that was the change that came about. And then many might recall that at a time in 2008, when President Bush was extremely unpopular in the United States, with popularity ratings in the 20s, the Prime Minister of India, who was visiting him at that time, said to him that the people of India deeply love you because of the way he was transforming the relationship. Now, when President Obama came after that, initially there was concern that will he continue what President Bush had done? Because as a senator, he had moved amendments to the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, which would have essentially killed the agreement. As a candidate, he had spoken about whether there should be some special envoy between India and Pakistan, whether there should be some mediation by the US on this issue. But once he came to power, the essential message from the Obama administration was that whatever President Bush had done was seen as settled law, and they would pursue cooperation starting from that point of view. And again, therefore, during the Obama administration, the relationship evolved significantly. President Obama has been the only US president to visit India twice in his tenure, 2010, 2015. Before that, President Bush in 2006, President Clinton in 2000, and before that, President Carter in 1978. So you can see the difference happening. President Obama was the only US president to have come to India as chief guest on our Republic Day, which is surprising. We are both democracies. When we built our constitution, we adapted and borrowed also from the US Constitution, but no US president till then had come as chief guest on our Republic Day. He expressed support for permanent membership of India for the UN Security Council, membership of India in Nuclear Suppliers Group, and also declaring India a major defense partner. So step by step, you can see that the relationship is evolving in a positive direction. And that's why there was concern when President Trump came to power, was whether it would be continued. Now, at one level, candidate Trump had said that he looks at India positively, that India-US relationship would be the best in his tenure. A significant group of Indian Americans had supported him, raised money for him, for his campaign. So there was a positive framework in which we could look at the relationship. But he had also been critical on the H-1B visa issue. Once he came to power, from our point of view, one, there was no clarity on what the US was going to do on Afghanistan. During the campaign, he had said nothing on Afghanistan. In the address to the joint session of Congress in February this year, he said nothing on Afghanistan. What is US policy going to be on Afghanistan? And the US policy on Afghanistan will also determine how they will approach Pakistan. And this will clearly have an impact on us. And so far, that situation remains. Beyond authorizing the Pentagon to send additional troops into Afghanistan, 3,500 to 5,000, to maintain broadly the situation, what is the policy going ahead? We'll have to watch and see. Second, on the economic issue, again, if you look at the joint statement that came out, most of the US concerns on the economic issue have been reflected in the joint statement in terms of US wanting fair trade, in terms of intellectual property rights to be valued, preserved, etc. Some of our major concerns on the economic issue, H-1B visas, totalization, even though they may have figured in the discussions, are not there in the joint statement. Perhaps this was something you have to give something to get what you need elsewhere, because we got very strong language on terrorism. We got support expressed for the UN Security Council by the new administration. We got support expressed for the multilateral export control regimes. On the political issues, there was good support expressed also on the issues related to the Indo-Pacific for India's position. On the economic issue, perhaps our concerns were not adequately reflected, and that's an area of transaction or bargain that we'll have to deal with. And a third area where we will have continuing concern would be on China. Because we have to understand that the broad US and Western policy is not to contain and push back China, but to work to integrate China in the international mainstream. And that has been the policy since 1979, since the 1990s. And they believe that integration of the Chinese economy in the international mainstream, if possible on US and Western terms and norms, from their point of view, contributes to Western interests, contributes in a way to global stability. The challenge to them comes that as China becomes strong, it works to change the norms of the international order. For example, in South China Sea, it has changed the norms, it has challenged the norms, and the US and the West has not been able to do very much about it. Again, when the US did the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement with us, immediately after that, China announced that it was going to supply 2 nuclear power plants to Pakistan. And it did so bypassing the nuclear supplies group. And the US and the West kept completely quiet. So their challenge is that as they integrate China in the international mainstream, as China becomes stronger, it is challenging those very norms, and they're not effectively able so far to answer those challenges. And on the South China Sea again, although there have been different pronouncements, essentially US is saying, let us assert freedom of navigation, but not get involved in the question of ownership. But can you, in a long-term framework, de-link freedom of navigation from the issue of ownership? And that's something they're not addressing now. So I think that's a challenge we will continue to face going ahead. So in the global context, clearly we have no alternative but to build a good relationship with the United States. Despite the changes happening, it is the dominant power in the world. The kind of change that was done with the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, no other country in the world can bring that about. Secondly, if we look at our broader interest, be it not just the defense supplies, but economic issues, political issues, aspirations of Indian business, aspirations of the Indian middle class in terms of education opportunities, no other country in the world is in a position to provide the kind of space that the United States. Europe cannot do it, Russia cannot do it, Japan cannot do it. So it is a power that we have to engage with in a certain framework. But while doing that, we have to keep in mind that the US will not pursue its foreign policy to meet India's interest. US will pursue its foreign policy to meet US interest. And we have to do our foreign policy to meet our interest. And we have to see where is the convergence and nimbly adjust and play with that convergence to maximize our interest. So I think from that perspective, the PM's visit to US was very necessary to define the paradigm of the relationship under the Trump administration. And again, both in optics, because in terms of protocol, I do believe, as Jeff mentioned, that the White House signaled through protocol that they were imparting a lot of importance to the visit. The way he was received, the dinner he was hosted, the time spent with him, and then also in terms of substance. So now in the coming phase, we need to build on that, but expect that we will all the time have to nimbly play the game, because things globally are in a state of flux. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun.